Most of you know that I'm Carol Rankin, co-president of the League of Women Voters of the Edwardsville area. Thank you for all coming out on this potentially rainy evening. So we appreciate it. And we thank Dr. Shelton for giving us this time. And we will be videoing it and putting it on our website.
Fabulous.
Okay. Most of you know that I will say that the League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization. We don't support or oppose any party or any candidate, but we do take interest in issues, and we have a long history of supporting the bond issues for the schools, especially those that are involving safety. So we're very happy to have you with us.
Thank you.
There's some water over here. There's some cookies. And if you would like to have a sign in your yard that says vote, it's nonpartisan, it just says vote. You're welcome to take one. So I'm going to let Dr. Shelton structure how you want to.
Absolutely. Well, I have a lot of slides, and some of them have some detail that I hope you'll be able to see on the screen, but I'm actually going to go back a little bit and talk about the process of how we got to where we are today. Because we started with our strategic plan, and when I came in 2021 in the fall, the board and I decided that a new strategic plan was something that we probably needed to put in place. And so we started on a new strategic plan that would be a 5-year plan, and we developed a steering committee. Carol is actually a member of our steering committee, and the steering committee had the task of identifying what are the things that we want in that strategic plan. So we started with a new mission and a new vision and new core values. So our mission now is empowering each student to achieve personal success. Our mission had been the same for at least a couple of decades as we can look back. And our vision is we will build a thriving community of learners while creating authentic, meaningful pathways to success for each student. In that conversation about mission and vision, we also had a lot of other things that people felt like were really important. Things that they wanted in the mission, they wanted in the vision, but we also wanted something that was easily rememberable for staff, for people, for community. And so we added core values: community, inclusivity, integrity, students, and success. And so we start every meeting in our district with a reference to our mission, our vision, and our core values. And we just say that kind of anchors decisions for District 7. So then from there, we started looking at what are the goals, what are the things that we want to establish, how will we know that we've accomplished our mission and our vision. And we ended up with 5 goals. So these are our 5 goal areas. Goal 1 is about instruction and student experiences. Goal 2 is around our thriving workforce. Goal 3 is safe and supportive schools. That's really more the school environment, school culture. Goal 4 is family and community engagement. And Goal 5 is efficient and effective operations. And we have a team leader that leads each one of those goals. So, for example, Tara Fox, who's our Director of Curriculum Instruction, is in charge of Goal 1. And then she has subcommittees and teams that work on that goal and work every year on action steps that are within that goal. So I'm going to talk about Goal 5 because Goal 5, led by Dave Courtney, who's our Chief Financial Officer and Chief Operating Officer, we have action steps within Goal 5, and I always say that's about our money and our stuff, and those are our buildings and all the things within our buildings. And one of the action steps was analyze data to look at the efficient use of buildings. Well, there's a lot of ways you could think about that. You can think about the space that we have. You can think about the utilities. You can think about the environment within the building. And so we kind of took a step back and took a comprehensive look at our buildings and said, what were the needs of our buildings? How could we identify those needs? How could we work with our community to determine what priorities were important to the community? And we ended up with where we are today. So we started last fall with an Engage District 7 process. We just called this a community engagement process. We invited people to 4 different meetings in October at each of our intermediate buildings. So that's Warden, Columbus, Cassins, and I'm always going to forget one when I do it, Woodland. And we had those in a really short time period and presented the same information to each 4. And in those community engagement sessions, we had people sit at tables and really engage in dialogue. We gave them some information and then said, now we want you to take that information and help us prioritize what's important to you as a community. So in those first community engagement sessions, this is the summary of all 4 of them. They really identified 3 distinct priorities. School safety and security was one, Building infrastructure was one, and building envelope was one. So the envelope are the doors and the windows and the things that kind of make up the building. The infrastructure is mechanical and plumbing and electrical and things like that. And there were some other ones on there. You can't read those words. Enhanced site and air traffic, and traffic flow, energy efficiency, and sustainable work. And you can kind of see as you go down, it just gets lesser and lesser. Those top three were those. And then we asked them to also prioritize what is the functional needs that we want to look at. So the ability to access and control and secure the environment. So not only being able to know that we have a safe building, but being able to be safe as people are coming in, as staff are coming in. One of the leading things that affects the safety and security of a building is a door propped open. And why do people prop open doors? Well, because they don't have a key or they don't have a way to get back in the building. So providing that was an important piece of the functional part of the environment. Maximizing our student services. And then spaces for specialty instruction. So that could be library media, could be music, art, PE, intervention, things like that. Then we brought them back again, and these were open. We actually had different audiences at each of the 4 events. We came back again in November, and we said, okay, so here are the priorities. Now here's some needs in the building. Now help us rank those needs, knowing that these are the priorities you gave us. Same kind of structure, give information, ask people to come back together. And in total, in those 8 sessions, we had about 250 different people that participated at some level. We also had the ability for people to go online and fill out input online, so they were able to do that as well. And so when we came back together, we provided 2 specific tasks that they had to take. We asked them to help us prioritize the Hamel Midway conversation, which was, do we consolidate those buildings or do we put money into both buildings from a facility standpoint? And then with Lincoln Middle, do we build a new building somewhere else, or do we renovate and take care of the building we have, knowing that it's 100 years old? And then the other priorities, we asked them to just kind of rank with those 2 things. So the projects by priority, as determined by that group, were starting double entry doors at all District 7 schools. So this really aligned well with the very first priority that people said was important to them, which was safety and security. So making sure that all of our schools have double entries, and double entries with safe access. The second one was to renovate and rebuild Lincoln Middle School. We put some caveats with that when we talk about renovating and rebuilding, because we want to make sure that we can do it in a way that allows education to continue. And this was kind of my thing, but I think people were okay with it. We don't want to put students in trailers. Thinking about, we have about 900 students at Lincoln Middle School, and if you had a trailer that would maybe hold 50 students, we'd have 45 trailers somewhere on a campus. And when you do trailers, you also have to do ramps and bathrooms and electricity, and so it's a huge investment for very little return outside of you can do a construction project really fast. The third one was the Hamel Elementary School asbestos and some remediation and rebuild with that. And then the fourth one was to repair Midway. So that was the determination. And the fifth one was expanding the commons at the high school. So the commons it's a little bit of a safety and security issue, but it's also just a crowd control issue. And it's twofold. It's that lunchtime is really crowded at the high school. And the second one is that's the bottleneck that goes from the A side of the building to the gym side of the building, which is where we also have other classrooms. So every passing period, students are going through the commons, and that's the only way to get from one side of the building to the other. So providing a different pathway for students to get from one side to the other is also part of that. So those are the first 5 priority items that we'll talk about separately. And then there were 3 other ones that were identified. Safe and accessible playgrounds at all elementary schools. If you had a child that went through District 7 currently, or in the past, I'm going to say 20 years, you're familiar with having pea gravel in your washing machine and in your dryer. So, and because that's what's in the playgrounds right now, which is obviously a little bit more of a safety issue than a soft surface, but it's also an accessibility issue because we can't get students who have any kind of physical disability onto our playgrounds. The 7th one was safe and accessible gymnasiums at LeClaire, Glen Carbon, and Columbus. LeClaire and Glen Carbon have really tight spaces with their gyms, and they also have stages that are not used really anymore because they bring kids on risers and do other things. So taking out those stages and creating more space in those gymnasiums And then if you've been in Columbus Elementary, the gymnasium is in the part of Columbus Elementary that was the 2 high schools ago. So the high school before Lincoln was the high school. Built in the early 1900s, and so it's an old brick gymnasium. And if you go downstairs, it's in the very bottom of the building. The baseline for the basketball court is about this far from the wall. So students go to save a ball from going out of bounds, and the brick wall is going to hit them every single time. And there's really not a lot of space. So looking at the functionality, and that goes back to that specialty instruction spaces. And then the 8th one was the renovation of the media centers at Columbus and Woodland specifically, and then a new media center at the high school. So those are the bottom 3. And we'll talk about these in order, and as we are towards the top, I'll give you more information. As we're at the bottom, those are later issues that we're going to have like a concept design, but that's about all we have. So the Engage District 7 team, and that was led by Dr. Andre, our former superintendent, 2 superintendents ago, and Lucas Siren. Those were the 2 committee co-chairs. They recommended to the board that they place a $100 million zero tax rate change bond proposal on the ballot this April for building repairs and improvements. And their goals were, number 1, ensure funding is in place to address some critical needs in the district. And we'll talk about funding towards the end, and I'll talk about how that works in District 7. Ensure that all District 7 schools have up-to-date safety and security features, which is what we want for our students. Proactively maintain and update building infrastructure items like roof, window, electrical systems, plumbing, HVAC, and develop an initial timeline for those recommendations based on what we heard from the Engaged District 7 Committee. So they presented that to the board. Their initial presentation was in December, and then the board had an opportunity to really kind of pour over it, look at it. We had a couple of meetings where they were able to talk about it, and then they took action to put it on the bond, which is what brings us here tonight. So that kind of gives you the historical how we got to where we are today. So now let's talk about the fun stuff, because this is the good stuff. So priority 1 projects, as I mentioned, were the double entry doors. So we have 13 campuses with 15 buildings. I'm just going to talk about the school buildings today. We have other places like Hadley House, things like that. But 5 of our buildings already have double entry systems in place. So that's Cassins, Goshen, Midway, Liberty, and Wharton. 4 of those 5 were built in the 2000s and were built with that double entry in mind. But we don't have the access control that we need to be able to limit or grant access. And that double entry is only part of the equation, because it's also those access controls in other places. So those are pretty easy. And then we've got the double entry construction, which needs to happen on those other places. Now, double entry construction can be really complicated or it can be really simple. Really depends on the building. I'll give you a couple examples of those, and you'll notice that Hamel, Lincoln, and Nelson are construction related. So when we think about double entries, this is the example, just the general blueprint. You want to have a front door that allows people to come into a safe space where they don't have access to the rest of the student population. So they're going to walk in that front door, and they're going to be greeted by a safety officer, but they can't go anywhere else in the building until they're given access. And they can't go up and open the door. The door is locked. All doors are locked, and that safety officer is going to make sure that they're okay to go wherever they go and give them access to that place, whether it's the office or the commons or the cafeteria. And so that's that drawing. And so I'll give you a couple examples. These might be a little bit hard to see, but this is Glen Carbon Elementary. So Glen Carbon, and I'll do some pointing up here. This is the current entrance of Glen Carbon, and Glen Carbon was built in the early 60s, I believe. And when they built it, they built a double entry system, but the double entry is not big enough for anybody to be inside. You walk in, and it's a breezeway is really what it is, right? You walk in, there's a space, and there's another door. And then the safety officer's on the other side of that. So once somebody gets to the safety officer at Glen Carbon, you've kind of missed the window to keep them from getting anywhere else, and it's really up to that safety officer to stop them without there being another barrier. So what they're going to do is they're going to extend that breezeway out this way and create about a 200 square foot space. So if you think about kind of a small room, that gives you plenty of space for a desk, all the technology equipment we need, and it's really a small gathering space, and then they'll be granted access into the building. Glen Carbon's one of our unique buildings because the office for Glen Carbon, if you're familiar with it, is located up here. And so there's no exterior door to get to the office. Ideally what we want is somebody to come in the building, be with that safety officer, and then be able to go in the office without going anywhere else in the building, because that's the safest space, and that's how we limit the safety aspect for our students. So Glen Carbon, we can't do that. That's without building a brand new outside office. So, but we can certainly create that double entry system. LeClaire Elementary is a little bit of a different example, built in the same time frame, the same kind of breezeway system, but with LeClaire, the office is located right here. And there's a wall right here. So what they can do is they can come in, and there's a door that they can get in the office without going out into the student population. If you're familiar with LeClaire and Glen Carbon, the gyms are located very close to the front door, which was intentional. They wanted people to be able to use that space to come in. If you're coming in for a program, you're probably going to be coming into the gym, but that also means it's a really heavy traffic area for students. So at LeClaire, where the safety officer is, if you go in and you hand them your license and wait for them to check, there's a chance an entire class is going to walk right by you. So obviously not as safe as we'd like for it to be in today's climate. So this limits that, and now they've got that secure vestibule. Nelson is another unique building. The office for Nelson is located right in the middle of the building. All the classrooms make a square around the office. And so to get to the Nelson office, you actually walk past 4 classroom doors and the gym door. So you have access to multiple classrooms before you get to the office. So we looked at building on the outside of Nelson, and if you're familiar with Nelson, you also know that parking is a premium in that building, anywhere around that campus. And to build on the front of the building, we would have to take up some of the parking, and didn't feel like that was a sacrifice that we were willing to make. So instead, I mentioned those classrooms. 2 classrooms right here are going to be flipped with the office. So they'll build the office in the classrooms, and then rebuild classrooms in the office space. And now we've kind of made that safe, secure environment without any exterior construction. Still a little bit more of a project than just that smaller 200 square foot space. This is overall it'll be about 3,000 square feet that will be renovated. So it's going to be, it'll be a full summer project, but one that will be able to be done. So we've got other double entries. The high school will be one of the double entries that we take care of by putting up a separate wall, so that if you're familiar with the high school, there's 3 doors that you can go in. The left-hand door will be the one that there's a wall and a secure space. And when you go in that space, there'll be another entrance to the office, so you don't have to go out to the student population, and then the rest of it will be for traffic flow. So that's our double entry, project 1. The second one is Lincoln Middle School renovation and rebuild. And this was a really interesting process, because building a new school is pretty easy if you have land. It's an easy process. You hand it over to the construction company, they build it, you wait for it to be built, and then you move. Renovating an existing school is a challenge, because you either have to do it in summers, which is what we mostly do our facility projects in, or you have to work construction around when students are learning or as students are learning. So that becomes a whole different challenge when it comes to the time frame involved for construction. This is an overview of Lincoln Middle School, and it's the view I showed the board last week, and we started defining spaces in Lincoln, because when we work with our architects, we're talking about the chunks of the building that we can save and the chunks of the building we can't. The issue with Lincoln, and I think this might be on a later slide, this is the oldest part. This rectangle right here was built in 1925. It was built as a high school after Columbus Elementary. They had outgrown Columbus. Columbus became the middle school. They built Lincoln. And then every other piece that you see was added on at different time periods, in different chunks. This is the small gym and auditorium. It was built after a fire, apparently burnt down the old gym in 1959, somewhere around there. And then that yellow square on the bottom is the big gym. And that was the newest piece of the whole Lincoln Middle School. About 5 years ago, I think it was 5 years ago, there was a flood at Lincoln Middle School, and it flooded the entire gym. You may have heard about that. They got a brand new gym floor out of it. But what they discovered is that the sewer pipe that goes underneath the building, because Lincoln was built with everything going through the floor or underneath it, was broken. They scoped it and got down to just dirt and mud and couldn't figure out what else happened. There's also the water pipe that feeds that same area is also broken. The only way to fix that is to jack up the entire floor of that area and see what you find. And what our architects told us is, it could be a really easy fix where you just jack up the gym floor and then re-pour and replace, but it could also be that you get down there and you realize that it's all the way down the entire hallway, and now you're jacking up the hallway, and it's what the unknown is scarier sometimes than the known. And so their recommendation was this part of the building is something that we really either can't fix with water access, or we need to rebuild over it, one of the two. And so that's the highlight, which is what was really interesting when we presented that, because everybody expected the 1925 portion to be the part that was the old part that needed to be torn down, when really it was the newest part of the building. The other thing that's interesting about Lincoln is because the 1925 section is older, it has already had some renovation throughout the years, because it was on a steam heating system. Now it's on a boiler system, and so they've got all those steam pipes that have really, as they've leaked, they've gotten replaced or they've gotten capped. And so there's been some renovation in the 1925 part, but there wasn't really in the 1959 and 67 portions. So when we look at each of those options, we're talking about, so can we keep this section? If we keep it, what does it look like? And if we can't keep it, then what do we do to replace it somewhere else on the property? If you're, just to orient everybody, up here you can just see the very edge of the Hadley House parking lot. So Hadley House is up here. This is all green space. We've got some green space over here. We've got a parking lot here, and then you can see the parking down here in the football field. So there's some space to work with, but we didn't really think there was a lot of space. And so I called our architects, and I said, so everybody wants to keep Lincoln, and we're not sure that that's an easy thing to do. We don't even think it's possible, really. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to design something, and we're going to show them how ridiculous it is, and then we're going to go back and we're going to say, okay, now we're going to build a new building, right? That was our plan. About a day later, the architect calls me. And architects get really excited about buildings. Not everybody does, but he calls, and you can tell Greg's really excited. He's like, listen, I've got this cool design. I think it's going to be really neat. I said, Greg, are you serious? I said, because I expected a 6-story building somewhere, because we can't tear down without building. He said, no, I think there's more space than you realize on this end of the building. And this is old space that really hasn't been renovated, and it's not really used for instruction primarily. There's 2 classrooms in there that are used. There's an art room and an ag room that are used pretty regularly. And otherwise, it's used for technology storage. It's used for our facilities department. It's used for food service storage. And so we can tear down that part without ever touching, really, students. We just have to relocate 2 classrooms. There's a great separation. And then we rebuild on the north side, and we build a new gym. We build a new this and new that. And then you've got the space to move students while we renovate the other part of the building. And so we started to process through that a little bit, and that was version 1 of where we are today. And we're still not at the final version, but we're a lot closer than we were. And so I talked about all this, fire protection and lighting and all the things that Lincoln needed, bathroom upgrades, things like that. So this was the kind of the concept design that he shared with me. This is actually version 2. Version 1 had this long classroom wing going down the football field. And again, architects really excited, right? This big wall of windows, it's a 3-story building, all the classrooms, the hallway looks out over the football field. It's going to be really scenic and long, right? Because it's going to go all the way down the football field. So then we started playing with, well, what can we do? How can we condense it and keep it a little tighter? And so they moved the classroom bar to right here. So this is the classroom wing as it stood in this version. It's still different today. Gym's locker room. So the yellow is keep space, and the gray is new space. And the keep space gets fully renovated because we don't want a 1925 building and looking classrooms and with a 2024 building looking classrooms, because kids are going to notice, right? So this also includes renovation of all the space. From there, we went to here, which is the rendering of what is a version of the new building. Nothing is set in stone yet, but you can see there on the left-hand side of the picture, that's the right-hand side door of the current Lincoln. And so that's this part of the building, right here. This is the edge of that building, and then this is the new space. And as we met with people to get feedback, one of the things we heard was, we've got this big, beautiful brick and stone historic building that's 100 years old. The last thing we want is this steel and glass structure standing next to it that looks out of place in our beautiful, scenic downtown area. And that's a valid concern. And so that's something we passed on to architects, and I think they've done a really nice job blending that together in this visual. So the other thing, how many of you have been in Lincoln? Okay. So if you walk in Lincoln, you realize that there are ramps and steps and ramps and steps and ramps and steps. We've got 8 stairwells in Lincoln that we'd love to not keep all of them because stairwells are great places for middle school students to hide. So we'd love to fix that. But one of the things they wanted to take care of is as few level changes as possible. So everything that we can do to make levels match as you walk from the new to the old, and if we can fix the level changes from the old to the old, we're going to do that as well. So what they did, this is an example of the first floor at Lincoln, the bottom floor. This is the new space, commons, locker room, kitchen, welcome center, new entry, and this is one hallway that goes all the way down. So no level change, no ramps. The stairwells are still there, but I'm told that some of those might get taken because we're going to move some elevators too. We're going to put some new elevators in the building. So you can see the stairwells here in different spots. And so each floor is replicated just like that first floor, where the hallway goes all the way down. They've also renovated the classrooms. So again, Lincoln was a high school built in 1925. So there's a storage room and an office and this other little room with the classroom, and the classrooms aren't all great shape. So now all the classrooms get to be a pretty uniform size. They get redone. New technology, new flooring, new lighting, because if you've been on the bottom floor of Lincoln, you know that it needs some new lighting. And so that full renovation. The other important thing that we felt like was important from a cost perspective is the theater. So the theater is that blue box blue rectangle on the left-hand side. So this is the theater. Right now, these are the locker rooms that were used by the gymnasium. So the gym's just on the other side of that. Those locker rooms didn't have water, they don't have sewer, and they have kind of a smell to them. And so we initially were going to tear that block down. That box was the theater and the gym was all one big box. And they came back and they said, well, what if we didn't tear it down? What if we just didn't use it for anything that needs water, sewer? And we went down and we took care of that and then just used it for other space. Now, there was a lot of versions of other space. Right now, it's scheduled to be storage because a lot of our middle school sports programs need a significant amount of storage for field hockey sticks and football equipment and things like that. So Liberty's storage is by their gymnasium in this fenced-off area that's about the same size as those 2 locker rooms. So that's what they did there. And then but by doing that, we were able to keep the theater, which was a significant cost saving. So to build a theater is $10 to $15 million. As we walked into the theater at Lincoln, it needs some new seats and it needs just a little bit of a refresh, but structurally it is a great space, much better than the theater at Liberty. And so people were saying, we're trading some smaller spaces and things like that. What can we renovate? What can we keep? So that's what we did. There's another view of Lincoln coming from the north side. So this is standing like in the Hadley parking lot looking down. You can see the gymnasium there on the right. The other thing that's really nice about building today is they know so much more about safety and security, creating storm shelters. And we have in Illinois, school code says if you renovate more than 50% of the building, you have to provide a FEMA-rated storm shelter. So that means that the strongest tornado could come through the building, come through the area, and that gym is still going to be standing, and it's going to be standing with generator, bathroom access. You can live in there for days. So one of the gymnasiums will be equipped as a storm shelter, and so that means they can also in the other gym put windows and let a lot of natural light in, and that's something they've really tried to embed in the design. Again, another view, this from the south side, so you can see the main entrance there on the left, and then you can see the flagpole kind of in the distance where the gymnasium is. All right, so that takes us through Lincoln. Any questions about Lincoln? Because that's the most complicated one we'll talk about tonight.
How many students will that accommodate?
So it will accommodate about 900 students. There are about 840 there now and about 860 at Liberty. We don't anticipate any growth in the next decade at those buildings based on our current enrollment. Now, I always put a little asterisk by that because I think in our community, we're probably 2 years from a significant population boom. We just don't know when that's going to happen because we do have land for development. So, but we don't anticipate, based on our current kindergarten numbers, a significant change. There's also the ability to expand on this later if we needed to. Other questions? Yes?
Who was your architect?
Our architect was Corrigan Clark, formerly Ittner Architects. So Ittner is a school, they do schools only out of St. Louis, and Ittner, in the middle of our process, was acquired by Corrigan Clark, who's a larger national firm, but that Ittner group is still the one in St. Louis.
Congratulations to them.
They've done a great job, and we chose them because this is kind of what they do. They work with schools on bond proposals, and they also do facility things. They're working on Maplewood Richmond Heights High School, which was built in 1929. And so we got to tour that last week just to see, what they're doing in the middle of the old to blend the new, and how they handle construction with students in the building, because that was the other thing that we wanted to see. So they've done a fabulous job. Yes.
Does each of these schools, as you go through them, have a library or media center, or is that a separate question?
They do. Lincoln and Liberty both have media centers that are about the same size. We've not had a media specialist or a librarian in District 7 since, I'm going to say 2005-ish. In the early 2000s, Illinois pulled all the funding for library media. So there used to be a library grant, and so you would apply for that library grant that would pay for part of your librarian salary. And if you've been around, you know that we went through some budget cuts, and so that was part of that budget cut. We started to come back and start to fund library things again, but the librarians and the media centers have really taken on a different meaning in schools today, because it's no longer about checking out books. Kids read books on their phones and on their tablets and things like that. It's about everything else that goes with multimedia and using resources and being a critical consumer of resources. And so that's an area that we're going to be working on in programming, but we do still have the spaces. Good question. All right, there'll be more. You'll have an opportunity to ask more questions. So Midway Elementary. Midway, we've had a couple facility issues as we started to look at that building. We discovered that, number one, there was a significant amount of water surrounding Midway. In the storm sewers, there's some settlement that it's causing, and we don't know the degree of the settlement yet. And there's water coming up through the floor. So as you walk through Midway, I should have put this picture in there. As you walk down the hallway, and this is in the newest portion of Midway, built in 2000, Terry, do you remember when that wing was built? I'm going to say early 2000s, 2000-ish. I think it was about when Liberty was built.
4 or 5 maybe.
Yeah, but as you walk through, you can see in the tile that everywhere there's a groove on the tile, it's discolored, and it's discolored because the water has caused all the glue to come up on the tile, and then you scrape the glue off, and it takes some of the finish off the tile. So we knew that, and apparently this has been a problem that's going on for a while, and we've kind of been trying to band-aid it and figure out what's going on. So we've engaged our construction firm that we're working with in Midway is working on engineering designs to figure out, number one, why is there water there? Because there should be, and we don't think it's water table water. We think it's some drainage issue. I think what we're figuring out is it's not our fault. It's actually not draining because of something else off property. We're just not sure what that is yet, but they're doing some work there. They did some borings to go down and see what the water was down below the concrete pad. They've also tried to look at the subgrade materials just to see if there's any significant settlement that's going to happen. So we're waiting on all of that to come back. They also did a topographical analysis to see from above, where's the water going when it comes in? So if you have a heavy rain, is it all kind of centering down the Midway, or is there a place it's supposed to go from there? So we're waiting on that engineering report. We also, and one of the issues that came up as we were working through the buildings is bus routes. And we learned that our north area bus routes were not, the times that were being published to parents were not the times that our parents were experiencing. So what was being published was you've got a 35-minute route from here to here, and our parents were telling us that no, actually it's a 53-minute route, and I time it every day, and that's really what it is. So anything that's going to impact that, we needed to know. So we needed to go back and work on some bus routes and look and see where that data was. So from that, our goal is to develop a plan for Midway based on community priorities and the additional information that we get from the engineering survey. So we don't have all of that information back yet. We've dedicated $2 million to fixing Midway. Part of that is going to be bringing up the floor down to the concrete slab and putting down a topical barrier that's going to keep the moisture out of the floor. In one of the sections, there was no vapor barrier put down in that 2002 section. And in the older section, vapor barriers I don't think were around yet when it was built. So there's nothing that keeps the water from coming up through the floor. And so bringing up the tile, that means taking out the lockers, taking out all the cove that goes around it, and putting down new flooring, putting down that top coat area new flooring. So that's right now about a $1.3 million estimate. And then we're still waiting on the engineering survey that will tell us about grading and things like that we need to do. Hamel Elementary is a building that was built in that same time frame, 50s, 60s. And when Hamel was built, it was built on the left-hand side. You can see those dark gray kind of octagonal shapes, these spaces right here. So Hamel was built with pods. And so I don't know if any of you went to school in pods. I was a principal of a building that was built with that kind of open concept, which is the pod idea. And it was built in the 70s, so it had to be really energy efficient, so they didn't put any windows in it. So there's no natural light. And since it was built in the 70s, it's this open classroom concept and has asbestos in the ceiling and in the floor. So we need to remediate that asbestos at Hamel. And those pods are used for classrooms. They are pie-shaped classrooms. So if you walk in, it's kind of an octagonal wall over here. The wall comes out, and kind of comes to a point. There's your door, and then you go next door. And so we wanted to build new classrooms at Hamel to replace those pods. And so then we have this design. We've got kind of a time frame there. The colored shapes are the shapes that are going to be either renovation or new. If you think about, I'm going to give you a line. On the right side of this blue square, so this is the line. On this side is existing building. So some of that's renovation, some of it's shifting the entrance. On the right side is the new construction. So that's a new gymnasium, and then 6 new classrooms along with a couple little other small intervention and office spaces. That's going to give us the ability not only to get students out of those pods, but it adds a couple classrooms for us so that if we can get to the point that we want to expand early childhood to the north area, we have the space to do that. And so one of those classrooms is an early childhood classroom. The commons will stay, and that's that blue square that I told you was on the left-hand side. Right now that serves as the gymnasium, the cafeteria, the auditorium, everything. So if they gather, it's in that common space. And so this gives them a new gymnasium as well that will mirror some of our other primary schools that have larger gyms. And you'll see that's a year-long process. The goal is by next August they're done and have finished the construction side, and we'll just be working on the cleanup on the west side of the building. EHS Commons expansion. This is priority number 5 out of the 5 priorities. So it's the one that's the least developed of all of them. It's the one that would not start anytime in 2023. That would probably be a 2024 start. If you look on the left-hand side in that lighter shaded area, that's the current commons, and you'll see at the top there's 2 arrows that go down. Those are the 2 arrows that kids are walking through to get to the other side of the commons. And then you'll see on the right-hand side a 7,000 square foot addition with another satellite serving area, and you'll see another arrow up here. So that's an arrow that'll come from a hallway that's going through the current media center. So there'll be another passway for students to get from one side to the other. And then creating that extra serving line will be helpful as well. Right now we feed about 600 students per lunch. And so they have about 25 minutes to get through the line, find a seat, and then 20 minutes later, another group comes in, another 600, and then another 600, and another 600. So space is at a premium, getting through the line is a premium. This just creates a whole lot of space for students to be able to access. Later on, when we get to priority number 8, which is a new media center for the high school, you'll see that the commons, because the media center is to the right of that. We'll get to that in just a second. So priority 1 projects are just what they are. They are the first things we're going to do. Because when we talk about a $100 million bond issue, this early on, everything we get is a very soft estimate. So the construction companies are telling us they're building contingencies in, they're giving us the worst case scenario, not the best case scenario, and so we anticipate we will be able to get through all 8 priority projects, but we also don't want to start all 8 and then get halfway through and realize we can't finish 2 of them. So we've spaced them to where we think we can do the first 5, We'll see where we are from a funding perspective, and then we'll do the ones that we can do left. Elementary playgrounds. That's not our building, but that's an example of what that would look like. Our elementary playgrounds have kind of been put together as a hodgepodge of district started, PTO helped, expanded in places, cut in places, and so getting to a place where we have safe, accessible playgrounds for all of our elementaries is important. This is a number 6 priority, but honestly, this is probably the one that the district could do out of our operating budget, and we would just do in phases. And so if we think we're going to be short anything, this probably is going to go out of the bond and into the district budget and still be something we'll focus on the next 3 to 5 years. The gymnasium projects, I mentioned LeClaire and Glen Carbon. This is the Columbus Gymnasium, and you'll see that umbilical cord that kind of goes into Columbus, and what that will do is it will make the gymnasium accessible for our community as well, because we can have a separate entrance just to the bottom, you can see that arrow going up, without giving access to the rest of the building. So it's going to be very easy for that gymnasium to be something that can be used by the community as well. And that's on the back of Columbus where the asphalt is right now, is where that will be. And then the media center at the high school, Columbus and Woodland get a refresh of media center, and the high school, and there you can see the commons and the new commons space. And if you're standing there and looking out from the commons, you look out onto the Winston Brown track and the back football fields. That's also open space from a security standpoint. And so actually when I first came in, one of the police officers I spoke with said, one of the first things I do is figure out a way to make that common secure, because right now it's wide open for anybody. It's just full glass, and you can see 600 kids in there eating, and there's no limiting access to the back. That's a driveway. And so enclosing that with the media center seemed to make sense. Also, it creates one more pathway from one side of the building to the other. So now we've got 4 pathways. Also gives us a chance to really update that media center so that it has podcast, broadcasting space, things that are going to be very applicable for students as they leave our high school. So it is a zero rate tax proposal, and that's probably the thing I get the most questions about. We don't get a lot of questions about our projects now that we've gotten a lot of input and we've been able to get feedback. But one of the things people say is, well, I don't understand, how can you get $100 million but it doesn't cost anybody anything? So to talk about that, we have to talk about the way we tax in schools. And so taxes are based on we collect taxes based on our EAV, and our EAV is about $1.6 billion right now. So that's everything within the District 7 footprint. About a little under 80% of that is residential. And then we've got about 15% commercial, the rest is agricultural and industrial. With that EAV, based on what the state of Illinois has set, we can borrow 13.8%. That's the cap for a unit district. So for us, that is $63 million, which is our current debt, plus $168 million, which is what we have available to us. So a little over $230 million is what we have the ability to borrow. Now that goes up every single day as our EAV goes up and we pay debt down. So this is from July 1. It's actually about $260 million now. So the team intentionally requested $100 million because that's the top number we said we were comfortable with. One of the things we presented at the very first community engagement session is a little history of finance. And if you were here in 2008, 2007, there was a bond issue that was passed in 2007, and it borrowed every last cent we could get. We borrowed all the way up to our credit limit, for lack of a better term, and so we had no capacity left to borrow. And then the economy kind of went south on us, and that didn't help either. So we want to make sure that we have space to absorb anything we would need to absorb, whether it's growth because of students moving into the district or anything from the economy standpoint. So we feel like $100 million, we can do that. So then how does that work? Well, we divide all of our funds into 9 different funds, and I'm not going to get into all the 9 different funds, but when you have money that you collect for a certain fund, you can only pay for the things within that fund. So the operation maintenance fund is a good example. We collect a certain amount of money in operations and maintenance based on the levy that we set. We can't pay teachers out of that fund. We can't buy books out of that fund. We can pay for the operations and maintenance of the buildings. We can pay custodial salaries. We can pay for equipment and maintenance supplies. We can pay utilities out of that fund, but we can't pay those other things. Same thing for transportation. And so we have it's called the bond and interest fund, which is our debt service fund. So there's a specific amount we levy just to pay back debt for the district. So that is currently about 88 cents, give or take a few cents. I'm not sure where it actually ended up, but 88 cents is where we want it to stay, and that's where we believe we can keep it long term and really focus on facility projects through that. So an increase in any of those levied amounts requires the voter approval. So 2017 Prop E was an increase in the education fund, so that required voter approval. We want to issue $100 million in bonds, that requires voter approval. Each year we also retire debt, so we're paying, as part of that 88 cents, we're paying down debt on an ongoing basis. So an example of that is here. This is a ballpark amount. It may not be down to the exact dollar, but it should be pretty close, of how much debt we pay every year with that 88 cents. Now that changes every year because as the EAV goes up, we get more money from that 88 cents that we can then put towards debt. Make sense? Yes?
What is EAV?
Your equalized assessed valuation. So you're going to get, in a few weeks, you're going to get something from the county that says, we've assessed your property and here's how much it is. So for us, that's the total of all the properties in District 7. That's a good question. Thank you. So so now you can kind of see how that adds up very quickly over time and how we would be able to pay off debt without accumulating any additional taxes or gathering any additional taxes. So the other issue, and I've had someone come up and say, well, why don't you just pay off the debt and then just save money, and then you'll have the money to do what you need to do. Well, taxing bodies can't do that. We're bound by law to tax what we need, and we can't have I'm going to call it a rainy day fund. We have a cushion that we keep so that when taxes don't come in on time, we borrow from our own internal bank, but it's about 20%, and that's where our comfort level is. If we levy anything more and we start accumulating money, then obviously we're not being good stewards of those tax dollars, and we're not giving everything we could to students. So we don't want to accumulate money. There's the 13.8% of our equalized assessed valuation. And so what we've done is we've worked with our finance partners to essentially refinance debt and then keep the tax rate exactly the same. So much like you would a home equity loan or refinancing your mortgage, they'll call you and they'll say, hey, you can get $60,000 and it's not going to cost you a penny, except you're going to pay another 5 years, right? So that's what the district is doing. We're paying a little bit longer on the debt, keeping the tax rate exactly the same. The other difference between a homeowner and the district is a homeowner's goal is to pay off your home, right? The district's never going to pay off the district because we're always going to have to put things back into facilities because we're going to be there forever. You're going to sell your home at some point in time, or you're going to move out of your home. We're going to always live in our facilities. And so by nature, this is the way that we are able to keep our facilities up to date. Doing this, we are looking and have planned so that we could do future facility assessments in 2029, 2035, 2041, and we could just keep going every 6 years. That's kind of how we've tried to structure it. So that not only when we're here in 2029, but in the future, maybe when we're not here, the people who are in these roles have the ability to go back and continue to keep our facilities up to date.
So if this is just kind of like a rolling debt, you pay it off, but you still can use more of the debt to keep it at the same level, why do we need to vote on this? Why do we need to approve it?
Because by statute you have to. So if we're going to issue bonds, the only type of bond you don't have to vote on is a health, life, safety bond. So those are bonds that are filed with the regional office based on health, life, safety issues in schools, and the district issues those pretty frequently. I believe we issued some right before I got hired in 2021, and so those are usually for roof replacement. You can do some asbestos remediation, but you can't do remodel projects. You can't do new construction typically with health, life, safety bonds. Great question. And so our goal is to just as a commitment to our community, keep that tax rate stable. Because I think that's the one thing that nobody likes is a guessing game of what the tax rate's going to be. So that way our goal is to keep that tax rate stable for the foreseeable future, the next couple of decades. Now, questions? Other questions? Yeah, Carol.
When you were talking about safety, I didn't hear anything about any kind of special glass. Because in some of the
Mhm.
attacks on the schools, they have
Sure.
gotten into the school through breaking the glass.
So we already have film on all of our ground floor glass, so all of our doors, windows, things like that. I don't know the year, it was several years ago, the district went and put film on there, and the film essentially keeps the glass from breaking out of the case. So you can go up and you can shatter it, but it's going to stay in place and you're not going to be able to get through that glass. Yes?
How come the asbestos was just located or just now being taken care of?
So the district has been doing asbestos remediation for the last decades. It's an ongoing process. We actually, asbestos isn't dangerous unless it's not encapsulated. And there's different types of asbestos. The asbestos that is, for example, in the ceiling at Lincoln are just the pucks of glue that are the adhesive. So that's not really anything that's going to be airborne. We certainly want to take care of it if we can, but it's not something that's going to be harmful for students. There's other asbestos in tile and in walls that if it would become airborne, that would be a safety concern. But as long as it stays encapsulated, then it's okay. For quite a while, and I can't tell you when, I'm not a construction history expert with schools, but for a while, the general philosophy with schools was to just encapsulate the asbestos. So if we just put something on top of it, then it's okay. So it doesn't mean that it's never going to be a problem, but it certainly solved the problem for that point in time. So if, for example, in Lincoln, if we go down to the bottom and we have to get into the concrete to fix one of the steam pipes that's leaking, we have to break through asbestos tile to get there. So now we have an asbestos remediation problem, and when we had that issue, we went to, we recarpeted the boardroom. So the boardroom carpet was bunching up and causing tripping, and so we decided we were going to recarpet it over, I think it was a winter break, it was a break that we were going to do it. And they were getting the carpet up because it's glued down, and they chipped the tile. And if you can imagine, I forget the movie, like Monsters Inc., where they all come in and they're all getting on Sully to get him out. That's kind of what it was like. It was like they sealed off the door. They would only work during non-work hours. You couldn't be in the building when they were working, and it took 4 weeks to get the asbestos up and out of there before we didn't have a boardroom for a while. But that's a good example of sometimes you don't think you're going to do asbestos remediation, and all of a sudden you're in the middle of it. Yes?
Maybe I can be understood better this way. Was any thought given to putting solar panels on the facilities when you're redoing them?
Absolutely. So that's actually a different project that we're working on that's not part of the bond issue.
Okay.
We're working with a contractor right now looking at solar panels. So initially we were only looking at a number of them, but the incentives in Illinois for solar panels right now, and especially for schools, is so good that we can recoup our costs in about 3 years by putting solar panels on all the buildings. So what we're doing right now is looking at all of the roofs and seeing which ones need to be replaced before we go up and put solar panels on top of them. Even when we put them on there, they'll be ballast down. And so if we have to lift them off to put on a new roof in the future, we can, because solar panels right now are guaranteed 30 years. So we anticipate quite a bit of profit, and not profit, savings from those solar panels. Especially important because our electric bills, like your alls, are running right now $750,000 ahead of where we anticipated they would be. So our CFO is a pretty conservative guy, and he likes to move pretty slowly. He's not trying to move slow on the solar panels. He's trying to get them done because it's money that's going out the door. Yeah.
What's your worst case scenario if the bond issue does not pass? You've got some playground stuff you can go ahead and do, but...
Yeah, we probably wouldn't do that if the bond didn't pass. We probably would focus on some of those health, life, safety things, and we would issue some health, life, safety bonds. So there are a couple projects that, as we started to talk last year, that were slated to happen, and we've just kind of hit the pause button on them. One of them is, and this is actually what started the entire conversation, the Lincoln Middle School fire alarm system needs to be replaced. We anticipate that being a $2.5 million project to replace that fire alarm system. It's a lot of money, but it's really a lot of money when you think about fire alarm systems, because to replace the high school one was $400,000. And so just by comparison, that's a great example of some of the retrofit things that maintenance goes into that we could probably just be a lot smarter about it. So Dave came in and he said, I think it's gonna be 2.5 million, and I said, well, why don't we just hold for now, and let's see if we move forward with our facility planning, and if we don't, we'll go back and do that. So that's one of the projects that we would have to go back and do pretty quickly. Is just and they would replace all the panels, all the strobes, everything like that.
So if the bond issue does pass, what would the cost of replacing the fire alarm system?
It'll be embedded in the new
It'll be embedded,
construction.
but it wouldn't be probably as much.
No, it'll be less than the high school, because when they go in and they do the renovation, I'm gonna say they're gonna go down to the studs. So in the renovation, they're removing everything. The inside is gonna be brand new. So the only thing left that will be existing is actually the shell of the building, which structurally is in great shape. Everything else, new mechanical, new HVAC, new wiring, new doors, new casing, new lighting, new everything. Yeah.
The fluctuating interest rates, how does that impact?
It certainly doesn't help a whole lot.
No. I mean, is it kind of one of those things where you've got kind of like a ticking time bomb, as far as the timing?
Not necessarily. Yeah, bond rates aren't as fluctuating as much. What we've been told from Stifel is they've gone up. They're running about 3 3/4, 4.25% right now, which is way higher than they were, but overarchingly not horrible.
Okay.
You
I
know,
mean, is there like a formula, if it goes up another 0.5 point or something, that's going to bring the value down of the bond?
there is that. Yeah. I don't know that formula, but yeah. As rates go up, that does impact our ability to spend money, because it does cost us a little bit more. Yeah.
When I was in a community engagement meeting, we talked about Hamel and Midway schools, and the consensus of that meeting was to consolidate those schools.
There was a strong consensus from most of the meetings, not all of them, to consolidate. The bus routes is what shifted that, because the bus route estimates that we got were no more than 50 minutes, and then we drove a route, and it took us 75. And nobody, including me and the board, we weren't comfortable putting a 5-year-old on a bus for 75 minutes one way. And so that's something that we're continuing to work through. We're actually in the middle of a study right now that's probably going to take the rest of this calendar year at least to look at just our entire transportation system. So they're breaking down traffic patterns, they're looking at where students live, looking at boundary lines, looking at demographics, and they're going to come back and give us some, is what we do now the most efficient thing that we can do? And if not, then what can we do, and is there a recommendation there? The transportation drives a lot, even though I hate that it does, but especially we have 185 square miles in our district. So to go from the furthest southern part to the furthest northern part without stops is about 35 minutes. And then you add bus stops and country roads and long driveways and waiting on students, and that adds a lot of time to it.
Is there opposition?
I can't imagine why.
There's always opposition. Nobody's 100% on anything. We've not heard of a lot of heavy opposition. One of the things we've tried to do is be as transparent, get as much input as possible, and continue that process. And so a good example, we've met with the St. Louis Homeowners Association, because they're our neighbor. And whatever we do in our backyard is going to be in their backyard as well. And so we've met with them on several occasions to get input on where we might end up and where we're going, and they've been great partners to work with. So anybody that's truly opposed, we've tried to bring in and say, well, let's talk and let's give us some input. The opposition is if it's no and the voters say no, and we don't ever put anything on the ballot again, in 2029 your tax rates will start to go down. But in the meantime, we will have issued health, life, safety bonds to just take care of the bare minimum things, and I think what our community wants is the best thing for our kids. So, and if we can do that at no additional cost to our taxpayers, that seems like a win for at least the education side, and I'm a taxpayer too, so I get that side too.
So one of the questions that I think kind of borderline opposition was, what's the hurry? And Susan asked, well, what about these asbestos projects? So we have those empty, unused pods up at Hamel that we've been talking about since probably 2018 or 2019. But just being able to have the funds in order to do something about those pods was really limiting us. And again, like the EHS Commons, I've been asking about that since I've been on the board since 2015. And I was told it was a $9 million project. So those kind of projects can't come out of our O&M fund or health life safety fund, because we just don't have that kind of income to handle those. And then the surprises that come with running a school district. So, you know, a $900,000 HVAC replacement or a $2.5 million fire security system replacement. And so those things are those little things that creep up that really tax the O&M or the health life safety funds. And then we have all of these construction projects that we'd like to take care of.
Yeah.
So to
I have-
kind of answer that question.
Yeah, and I
too.
have seen a couple social media posts that talk about our O&M balance, and we've got almost $8 million, about $8 million in our operation maintenance fund. And so people say, well, you've got $8 million. You can do 3 of these projects with that $8 million. But think about your house and when something goes wrong in your house, and then magnify that times 100, and that's what it costs a school district when something goes wrong. So we're going to have to put a new roof on the high school. It's going to be about $2.5 million to put a new roof on the high school. HVAC system goes bad. We have an air chiller at Liberty that's getting ready to go out, and that's about $500,000, I think was the estimate. So all those replacement things aren't $500, they're $50,000 or $500,000. And so having a decent buffer there is really important, because our buildings our newest buildings are 15 years old. Liberty Middle School is 25 years old. The high school is 27. So all those ages are prime for things needing replaced. Yes.
So you talked about not, you think the numbers of enrollment for Lincoln are stable. What about the high school? Is there going to be new facilities needed? I think you said something about expansion in the high school.
So the Commons is expanding. We're adding classrooms in the media center right now to accommodate. We've sent kids. This came up in the bond issue. So there were things that came up in the community engagement sessions that we were like, oh, that's a really good point. We probably should do that now and not wait on the bond. And one of those was we send, and for the past 20 years, have sent students to the Nelson campus as part of their education. And so they come to the high school in the morning, they get on a bus, they go to the Nelson complex that's owned by Lewis and Clark. We rent space from them. They're there for 38-minute classes, not 54-minute classes, because they have to have time to get there and get back. So they don't get the amount of time in class. And then when they're there, there's a secretary there, but there's not a nurse, there's not a counselor, there's not all the supports that kids need. And right now those are our freshmen, they're our 9th graders. And so somebody in one of our very first community engagement sessions says, now you're paying for space with Lewis and Clark over there, but you're asking us to approve expansion over here. Why aren't you just fixing that problem first? And yeah, that's a really valid point. So we're adding classrooms at the high school to be able to bring those students back, because the best place for them is going to be on our campus. So that was a good example. We don't anticipate growth at the high school. We're at about 2,350 right now. If you take our 2 middle schools together, you'll have and add another class, you'll have about 2,350. Our enrollment, and we actually did a comparison the other day looking at the Madison County birth rate, because we were curious, because post-COVID, we're expecting there to be a boost in population from babies from COVID, right? Like instead of a blizzard baby, we have COVID babies. Well, what we're seeing right now, based on the 2022 birth rate, is the birth rate in Madison County continues to drop. It's dropped. It used to be somewhere in the 3,100 babies a year. We're down to about 2,100 babies a year in Madison County, and that's over the last 20 years. But our District 7 enrollment in those last 20 years hasn't really changed. Our average kindergarten class in 2000 was 506. We had 1 year that we had this boost of, and it was my daughter's kindergarten class. It was 2008, the incoming class of 2008, 2009. What was over 600, and that was the first over 600 class we had. We had one more after that, and then it started to dwindle back down, and this year it was 508. So that 506 is it's a good average number, and what we see is that stays pretty consistent through elementary school, goes up a little bit in middle school, goes up again a little bit in high school, and we end up with graduating classes somewhere between 540 and 600. And that's our graduating class this year will be 590, or somewhere in that ballpark. Last year was a little over 600. And so we're not seeing any really shifts in that, which is interesting because the birth rate's going down, but yet our population is really stable. Now, I also think we're a growing community, and we've seen that growth. I think our private schools have helped absorb some of that growth from us. So Maryville Christian, Father McGivney, their populations have continued to grow while we stay stable. So if we didn't have those spaces, I wonder if we would be even bigger than we are now.
One more question.
Sure.
It might turn into a couple.
That's okay.
So back to Lincoln. So the plans right now, I mean, it's kind of you're not having to plan to move students out of the building, but you're basically building a new gym area, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then moving the kids into that area, and then adding other stuff. So the overall cost of the whole thing, through that process, what is that?
We're trying to keep it under 80 million.
80 million.
80 million.
And that includes what you're going to have to do to the new gym to make it accommodate classrooms?
That's everything. Yep. That's everything. And I say we're trying to because it's a challenge. A new middle school without the cost of land would have been somewhere in the 125 to 135 neighborhood, 125 million to 135 million. We obviously, if we were going to do that, that would have been most of the bond proposal if we ended up with that new construction. As we look at Lincoln, that transition time, that's something that we've spent a lot of time talking about. There's two things that increase the cost of construction, the size and the amount of time. And so the longer we take to build, the more expensive it gets with the 6% escalation every year and ongoing overhead costs, things like that. So what we're looking at is, and this changes day by day, so it may be different when we get there, but right now what we're looking at is building the new part, and the new part is that blue on the right, and some of that space will be temporary classroom space before it becomes a media center or health rooms or a locker room. So those will be temporary classrooms. And then creating temporary classrooms in the old gym. So now we've got new gyms ready to go. The old gym, we put partitions up, that becomes classrooms, and they close the 1925 section. And so we've actually talked about a cut line being right here. So students can still get in the theater, and when they get in the theater, they can also get over to their choir band rooms in this gym. That's going to be a new performing arts space. So they'll have access up here. They'll have access here, but they won't have access here. And so that will all get renovated at one time. One of the challenges of going, I'll call it down to the studs, is there's a lot of vertical things that have to happen. So we can't close the second floor and use the first and third because they're going to be going through the floors to run a lot of the wiring, HVAC, things like that. So we have to close it in vertical sections. So they'll close the entire 1925 section. So students will be on the opposite ends, which means they have to get from one side to the other because lunch is over here. So to do that, they will build a temporary hallway that goes like this, right across the back. And that temporary hallway will be enclosed, it'll be lit, it'll be wide, it'll be supervised, that's probably the other thing. And so that'll be the way that students get back and forth.
Where will they eat?
In the commons. So the new commons will be built as part of the new space. Yeah. We also, and we haven't determined at what point the old common gets torn down. So that's the other piece of this that will be accessible at some point in time. It could be one of the last things that gets torn down if we can phase it right. So the faster we phase it, the cheaper it gets. And so that's what we're looking at is how quickly can we get some of those things done? When can we do it in the right way? The auditorium and gymnasium project, those are just summer projects. So those are ones that if we do early on, we gain a lot of real estate that we can play with. And so that's not my job, that's our construction manager's job, but they're working on that to try to condense that timeline as much as possible. At one point, we thought it was going to be a 4-year project. So from beginning to end, that's from breaking ground till final dirt on the other end. We think we can get it down to at least 42 months and maybe even 3 years, which is still a really long time to live in construction. But yes.
This is probably not something that needs to be on the radar, but I just want to ask. of all the people who will be working on these construction projects, the architects, the laborers, how much of that is people who will bring that income back to our community? How many people actually are in this area, or is people coming in from Indiana to do the construction?
So for the Lincoln project, the construction, so we've got 2 construction management partners that we're getting ready to sign agreements with. SM Wilson is the one with the Lincoln project. SM Wilson has recently opened an office in Edwardsville. And so the construction project manager is Kerry Lortz, and he lives in Glen Carbon. His wife's a pediatrician in the area. His kids will go to Lincoln. So you talk about somebody that has an invested interest in what happened in this building, and his kids may end up in Lincoln during construction. So he's really invested. And the other one's Holland Construction. And several of the Holland people also live in the District 7 footprint. So that's one of the things that we really look for. And then one of the architects lives in St. Louis, but she's joked that she needs to get an apartment here because she's here almost every day. So we may sell her still on moving to Edwardsville because she's kind of liking the area. But I think the intent of all of them is that they would use local contractors in area whenever possible. JF Electric is doing our fire alarm project at the high school. So we do a lot of local business as much as we can. Good question. Yes.
So where can we get a yard sign that says we support
Yeah,
the
yard sign.
partnership?
I've got some in the car.
Yeah.
I'll bring them in.
There you go.
Well, take one that says vote, too, when you're
Well,
at it. because-
That's true.
Yes.
So are you involved, I know that the Intelligencer is doing a 5-part series on this bond issue. Were you the impetus behind that, or is that just all?
We were not. Penny Weaver is the new editor with the Intelligencer, and she's been here maybe a month and came in. We met with her early on, and she is a firm believer that schools should be strong partners with media, local media, and so she came to us and said, hey, I'd really like to do a series, and of course we were more than happy to meet with her and give her all the information that she needs. So no, she took care of that. But we really appreciate it because it's very helpful in getting a message out to an audience that sometimes we are not able to get to with our reach. So to that question, and we have 2 different groups. The district certainly puts out information to the community, much like we do today, but we can't advocate for yes or no votes. We can just give you the information, and so you probably got a postcard from the district that talked about the bond issue, just gave you information. You probably will also get something from the yes committee, so the citizens for District 7, so they're putting information out as well, and that's Terry in the yard sign, so she's got some yard signs for that.
If there are other questions, I want to thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thank you all for braving the rain. And we do have this final vote sign, since we are a nonpartisan